3 ships, one morning, and a superpower that didn't flinch. At 5:47 a.m., an Iranian gunboat opened fire on a cargo vessel without a single warning shot. No radio call, no signal, nothing. Just weapons fire on an international crew that had nothing to do with any conflict. Then it happened again, and again. By the time the sun rose, Iran had fired on 2 ships and seized a third. The MSC Francesca was dragged into Iranian waters under armed escort, and the footage was broadcast on state media like a trophy. The world waited for America's response. Missiles, strikes, something, but Trump said nothing. If you've been watching this crisis and wondering why Washington seems completely unbothered, stay right here, because what you're about to learn changes everything you thought you understood about who actually has the upper hand right now. Before we go further, if you follow geopolitics and you want analysis that goes deeper than the headlines every single day, hit that like button now. We break this down daily so you never fall behind. Here is what Iran completely failed to calculate. The silence from Washington isn't weakness, it's precision. Because while Iran was seizing ships and broadcasting footage, the economic clock was already doing something no missile strike could achieve faster. 31 ships have been turned back by CENTCOM order. 4 Iranian tankers seized, 8 more forced to reverse course. Iranian oil exports are running at effectively zero. The revenue hemorrhage is now between $400 and $500 million every single day. Total losses are closing in on $4 billion and accelerating. Trump posted on Truth Social with language stripped of all diplomatic cushioning. Iran is financially collapsing, starving for cash, losing $500 million a day. And then he added the detail that matters most. Iran's military and police are complaining they are not getting paid. When a regime cannot pay the people holding the guns, the architecture of control holding that regime together begins to fracture from the inside. And here is where the clock becomes something far more dangerous than a financial problem. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessant laid out the timeline with brutal clarity. In a matter of days, Kharg Island storage will be completely full. When that happens, Iran's oil wells will begin shutting down. Now stop and understand what that actually means, because this is the detail that rewrites the entire strategic picture. An oil well shut down under blockade conditions is not a policy decision you reverse with a phone call. It is a geological event. When underground reservoir pressure is released through a forced shutdown, damage begins accumulating immediately. In the best case, repairs take months. In the worst case, production capacity built over decades is permanently reduced. Every single day the blockade holds past that storage threshold, Iran is not just losing today's revenue, it is destroying its ability to generate revenue after any eventual deal is reached. The blockade is not squeezing Iran, it is amputating its future. Now here is the piece of this story that has received almost no attention, and it is the reason the next 72 hours matter more than anything that has come before. The USS Gerald R. Ford and the USS Abraham Lincoln are already positioned in the CENTCOM area of operations. Together, they represent the most powerful American naval deployment to any theater in decades. But there is a third carrier coming. The USS George H.W. Bush is currently rounding the Cape of Good Hope, deliberately avoiding the Houthi threat at Bab el-Mandeb. Open-source flight tracking places it near the coast of East Africa right now. In 3 days, it arrives. And when it does, something happens that has almost no modern precedent. 3 full American carrier strike groups simultaneously concentrated around a single operational theater. 3 carriers. Dozens of Aegis destroyers. Submarine coverage running beneath the surface. More than 50,000 U.S. military personnel integrated into a single combat architecture, operating above, across, and below the water. The Joint Chiefs have established a blockade framework stretching from Oman's southern coast to the Iran-Pakistan border. This is not maritime interdiction. It is a fully integrated missile defense architecture covering every threat axis at once. And the buildup extends beyond the waterline. More than 150 fighter jets are being deployed. F-22 Raptors, F-35s, F-18 Super Hornets, F-16 Fighting Falcons, B-1 Lancers and B-52 Stratofortresses are conducting intensive training at RAF Fairford in England right now. 3 additional AC-130J Ghost Rider gunships are being deployed to Saudi Arabia within the next 48 to 72 hours. A brigade from the 82nd Airborne has been deployed, bringing the potential ground force in theater to 10,000 troops. Washington's objective is unmistakable. Build a fortified military zone in the Western Gulf, protect 3 carrier strike groups inside it, and let the economic clock run Iran into the ground without firing another shot. One analyst put it plainly. The ceasefire extension is not de-escalation. It is the front armor. Iran is not watching America stand down. It is watching the final assembly of the most overwhelming concentration of American military power in the Middle East since the Iraq War. And Iran's answer to all of this was to fire on cargo ships. What happened on April 22nd was not a coherent military operation. It was a symptom. Because inside Iran's decision-making structure right now, something has broken badly. The IRGC acts independently. The Navy acts independently. The parliament speaker contradicts the foreign minister. President Pezeshkian holds one position, while IRGC Commander Salami executes a different one. Iran never officially accepted the ceasefire extension. It never declared it was ending one either. It simply had gunboats open fire in the early morning hours and then published the footage. The IRGC's logic was not military. It was psychological. Iran needs the world to believe it still has leverage, that it can create consequences costly enough to make Washington blink, that the price of the blockade will eventually exceed the strategic value of maintaining it. The ship seizure footage was not published to project power. It was published to prove Iran still exists as a relevant actor. When your wells are 2 weeks from permanent shutdown, when your revenue is zero, when no ally is moving to help you, and when a third American carrier is 3 days out, doing something, anything, becomes the only card you feel you have left. But this is the fatal miscalculation buried inside Iran's logic. Trump does not need to respond. Every Iranian provocation that falls short of the threshold requiring a military answer simply extends the window in which the economic strangulation continues. The IRGC seizes a ship, the blockade holds. Iran loses another $500 million. The wells inch closer to shutdown. And the arithmetic gets worse every single time. Iran has outlined what it considers its remaining escalation options, and they are worth examining carefully, not because they are likely, but because the gap between what Iran threatens and what Iran can actually execute reveals exactly how trapped it is. Iranian sources have described a coordinated scenario targeting the Yanbu pipeline in Saudi Arabia, which carries crude to the Red Sea and bypasses Hormuz entirely. Strike it, and Saudi Arabia loses its backup export corridor simultaneously with the Hormuz closure. They have also identified Fujairah, one of the world's largest fuel bunkering hubs in the UAE, sitting within Iranian missile range, whose destruction would cripple the refueling infrastructure across the Indian Ocean at exactly the moment when alternative routes are already straining. And then there is the option receiving the least public attention, but carrying the greatest civilizational weight. Approximately 7 major undersea cable systems running through or near the Strait of Hormuz carry more than 97% of all Gulf internet traffic. Iranian sources published a detailed map of these cable routes and described them as extremely vulnerable. If those cables are cut, Gulf states go dark digitally, financial systems fail, cloud infrastructure collapses, communications go down across the region. On paper, executing all of these simultaneously would be catastrophic. A quarter of the world's seaborne energy vanishes from markets instantly. Saudi Arabia's backup route is gone. The Gulf loses its digital spine. Global pressure on Washington to end the blockade becomes immediate and overwhelming, rather than gradual and manageable. But here is the problem. Striking Yanbu or Fujairah means Iran has declared direct war on Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Gulf states that have been carefully maintaining neutrality while watching this confrontation would find themselves directly attacked. Every political constraint keeping them from fully backing the blockade disappears the moment Iranian missiles land on their soil. Iran cannot survive the American blockade alone. It certainly cannot survive a coalition that adds full Saudi and Emirati military participation. The underwater cable option is perhaps the most self-defeating card in the entire deck. Cutting those cables does not hurt the United States or its carriers. It devastates China, whose financial systems depend on that connectivity. It damages India. It turns every party that has remained neutral into an active adversary in a single operation. Iran's escalation options are real in theory. In practice, each one costs more to play than whatever strategic value it returns, and a regime whose decision-making is fragmented between factions that are not coordinating with each other is not a regime capable of executing a precise, multi-vector escalation. The question is not whether Iran has these cards. It is whether anyone inside Tehran is still sober enough to calculate what playing them actually costs. The global dimension of this crisis has now moved beyond a US-Iran confrontation. Brent crude has surpassed $100 per barrel. Insurance companies have declared the strait a risk zone. Premiums have multiplied to levels that make commercial transit economically irrational without military escort. Freight costs on some routes have climbed 200%. The attacks on Greek and Liberian-flagged vessels have pulled third countries into a crisis they had no stake in creating. Greece is now responding to the targeting of ships connected to Greek shipping interests. Liberia is the flag state of a vessel whose international crew was put at risk in open waters. Panama's flag flies on the MSC Francesca, currently sitting in Iranian custody. On April 22nd, military planners from more than 30 countries gathered in London to coordinate a multinational mission to secure Hormuz. That conference was not called by the United States. It was called by the collective recognition of the international community that the strait has stopped functioning as a safe commercial waterway, and that restoring it requires coordinated global action. Iran's ship seizure operations are designed to trigger exactly this kind of global pressure, to make insurance costs and freight disruptions so severe that political momentum forces Washington to lift the blockade faster than its own strategic patience would allow. So far, it is not working. The blockade holds. The third carrier is 3 days out. And every Iranian provocation that falls short of requiring a military response simply extends the window in which the economic hemorrhage continues. There is one dimension of the American position that has not received the attention it deserves. CSIS analysis indicates that over 7 weeks of conflict, the United States has consumed roughly 45% of its precision strike missiles and approximately half of its Patriot interceptor inventory in theater. Those are significant numbers. But here is the asymmetry that makes this far less constraining for Washington than it initially appears. The United States can replenish. Its defense industrial base is running under wartime production incentives and generating munitions output at rates not seen since the Cold War peak. Iran cannot replenish what it has lost. The IRGC headquarters demolished, the intelligence chief and operations commander killed, air defense collapsed in the opening weeks when over 100 coalition aircraft entered Iranian airspace, struck central Tehran, and returned. Bushehr naval base leveled. The Imam Ali logistics hub struck, cutting supply chains to Hezbollah and the Houthis. Underground facilities penetrated by B-2 bombers carrying bunker-busting munitions that were supposed to be unreachable. Pentagon intelligence suggests roughly 50% of Iran's missile stocks, 60% of its naval forces, and most of its air force remain operational. But the remaining capacity is dispersed under the Mosaic Defense Plan, a doctrine of distributed autonomous cells designed to survive decapitation strikes by breaking the chain of command deliberately. The problem is that the Mosaic Defense Plan trades coordination for survivability. When your strategic situation requires unified decision-making at the highest level, an architecture of independent cells means no single authority exists capable of issuing and enforcing orders that all elements will follow. No one knows who is truly commanding Iran's distributed forces. The IRGC acts separately from the Navy, both act separately from the diplomatic track, and above all of them, the supreme leader is in intensive care. This is the structural reality behind the footage published at 5:47 in the morning. Not a coordinated strategic operation. A panicked reflex from a military wing operating without unified political guidance, doing the only thing it knows how to do: escalate. Hoping escalation rewrites an equation that is otherwise running entirely against it. The nuclear dimension of this crisis has now entered territory that 1 month ago would have been dismissed as alarmist. Trump announced publicly that Iran has agreed not to possess nuclear weapons and to hand over its stockpiles of enriched uranium. Iran has not officially confirmed this. Between a presidential announcement and a verified handover lies a gap where the IRGC's calculation about whether to accept institutional defeat or escalate toward something far worse is still being made. And then, from former CIA analyst Larry Johnson, came an unverified but deeply unsettling claim. During an emergency White House meeting, Trump allegedly requested nuclear codes. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs reportedly refused. There is no official confirmation, and there never will be. But when serious analysts and intelligence circles are openly discussing whether nuclear options entered a presidential conversation, this conflict has moved into a qualitatively different category from everything that preceded it. This is not a prediction. It is a recognition that the people watching this situation most carefully are no longer dismissing any scenario. 3 scenarios are now on the table for the next 72 hours. The first, Iran's diplomatic faction assembles enough institutional authority to produce a unified negotiating framework that addresses Washington's core demand on the nuclear stockpile. The blockade lifts in stages as verification proceeds. The wells are saved before geological damage becomes permanent. The regime survives in diminished but functional form. This is the scenario the entire American pressure architecture was engineered to produce. The question is whether any faction inside Tehran currently holds both the authority to accept it and the institutional standing to survive accepting it. The second scenario, Iran fails to produce a unified position. The IRGC continues provocations. Trump launches the second phase of Operation Epic Fury with 3 carriers in theater, 150-plus fighter jets, a fully replenished precision strike inventory, and strategic bombers that have been training for exactly this moment. Targets in this phase are deeper and more consequential for Iran's long-term military capacity than anything struck in the first. The third scenario, neither negotiation nor escalation. The status quo holds. The blockade persists. Iran absorbs $500 million in losses every 24 hours. The wells shut down. The geological damage accumulates silently. A population in fuel lines inside an oil-producing country reaches a threshold that no state television broadcast can contain. This is Trump's preferred scenario because time is working entirely for Washington. Every day the blockade holds, Iran's position weakens. Every IRGC provocation that falls short of requiring a military answer simply extends the window during which that weakening compounds. Iran spent 45 years building Hormuz into its ultimate strategic weapon, the threat that kept governments cautious, the card that tilted every negotiation slightly in Tehran's favor. For decades, the mere possibility of closing the strait was enough to shape the behavior of nations with no other connection to Iran's political agenda. At 5:47 in the morning on April 22nd, the IRGC fired on a cargo ship, and Trump said nothing. Not because Washington fears what comes next, because Washington is watching what the blockade is already doing to Iran without requiring a single additional action. Because the third carrier is 3 days out, and its arrival completes a concentration of American naval power without modern precedent in this region. Because the wells are approaching shutdown, and the geological clock, once started, does not pause because a gunboat seized a container ship and broadcast the footage. The ceasefire in Hormuz has effectively ended. What follows is not a new phase of military exchange. It is the final phase of an economic and strategic strangulation designed to make Iran defeat itself faster than any missile campaign could. The IRGC believes it is escalating. It is accelerating its own collapse. $500 million a day. Wells 2 weeks from permanent shutdown. A third carrier 72 hours out. 30 nations in London coordinating a maritime security mission. Commercial shipping insurance making the strait economically impassable. A population queuing for fuel in an oil-producing country. A supreme leader in intensive care. A command structure fragmented between factions contradicting each other publicly while the world watches. None of Iran's provocations have changed any of this. They have only confirmed it. The trap was set long ago. Iran walked into it slowly and then all at once. And what is moving through the water right now will make everything that came before look like the warning that was never heeded. We are updating this analysis every day as the situation develops. If this gave you clarity that you are not getting anywhere else, share it with one person who needs to understand what is actually happening right now. Drop your scenario in the comments. Do you think Iran negotiates, America strikes, or the blockade just grinds them down? Every comment helps more people find this analysis. And if you want to stay ahead of this story as it moves, subscribing takes 2 seconds, and it means you will never miss an update when the next development breaks.